Julie? Okay, awesome. So again, my name is Jean Booth, and I'm a Grants and Projects Analyst with DCFS. This is the training on the VOCA quarterly reports. We have a lot to go over today, and we want to just let you know that your time is important to us, just as it's important that we offer instruction and communication between our agency and yours. Some of this information may be a little bit easy for those of you who've had our awards for years, but we do ask that you still actively listen and not multitask during this training, as we hope everyone will be able to learn a few new things. Today, we're going to go over the VOCA quarterly report in detail by section and review and practice a lot of the common errors that we've been seeing and questions that we get. I went ahead and added a link to the poll that we use during these trainings in the chat. We will be using this polling to keep the training as interactive as possible. Oops, somebody has me open. The polls are anonymous, so if you want to answer the questions through the poll, that will remain anonymous. If you don't want to answer through the poll, that's fine too. You can utilize the chat box, but we will know who answered it, and it's not a big deal. We just want to make sure that you guys have ability to interact with the questions that we have, so either use the poll or the chat box, and that would be amazing. And I'm going to go over and give the poll over to Julie now.
All right, thanks, Jean. I would just go ahead and keep the poll open, as we're going to use it throughout the training to the last slide of the training. So after we answer these first few questions, I wouldn't close it out because we're going to need it again. So the first one is, what part of Nevada does your agency primarily serve? A, Clark County, B, rural county or counties, C, statewide, D, Washoe County, or E, none of the above. Oh no, you can't use the browser? Oh well, you can always answer in the chat if you feel comfortable with that. And so I see an A in the chat, and we're seeing some answers in the poll that should hopefully be displaying on people's screens. Give people a few more seconds since this is the first question, so sometimes it takes people a little bit to get it open. Oh, I've got two A's. One A was sent just to us, the organizers, and one C sent just to the organizers. So we have and a C in the chat also. So it looks like we've got a pretty good split, about 25% Clark County, 42% rural county or counties, 17% statewide, and 17% Washoe County. So thank you guys for participating in that. Oops, it's changing as we go. Some people are getting it up and open. All right, so the next question we have for you is, are you the person responsible for completing the quarterly performance reports for your agency? A, yes, B, no, C, sometimes, or D, I don't know. So we've got two A's and a C and yes in the poll, so that's yes. So some good, we're getting some answers. We're seeing, oh yes, another A in the poll, so yes. Good, so it's looking like most of the people on the training are the person responsible for completing the quarterly performance reports. That's great. We want to make sure that those people for every agency get the chance to attend, because they're the ones who's going to have to do it correctly. They're the ones who's going to have questions. We do have 14% that are not responsible. That's great too. We want people to know what others in their agency are doing and what they're required to report on. It's helpful if people are cross-trained and know what others are doing. So great, and I'm glad everybody's on and participating. So I'm going to talk real quick about the performance measures. They're standardized way of tracking activities that have been determined as important. And all questions on the first demographic tab and the direct services tab of your reporting form are derived from the VOCA federal reporting and are required responses quarterly. So the Office of Victims of Crime, or OVC, sets these, and so that's where they came from, and we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide who wrote them. So they are standardized so that the data can be tracked and trended across time, areas, and agencies. So everybody who receives VOCA, whether they're here or in New York or in Texas or any state has the same performance questions that they have to answer quarterly. And we have to report those to the feds quarterly. So when we ask you to get your reports in on time, it's not just because we're mean and we like things on time. It's because we have a deadline that we have to turn around and submit the reports to the feds by, and it's a short deadline. So that's why we ask that of you, and that's where the questions come from. And where does the data go? We complete quarterly and annual reports for the feds with the data you guys send us. Sometimes we also have to send that data for state officials have questions about things. So it's important that we help you be able to submit them on time and accurately so that we don't have to ask for a bunch of revisions. So now we're ready for our next poll question. Have you ever completed a VOCA quarterly report for your agency? A, yes, tons. B, yes, 1 or 2, or C, no. So we got, I don't know if that, oh yeah. So we have an A in the chat box. I think for this question, it's hard to tell if it's from this question or a previous question sometimes in the chat box. But we're seeing some people respond to the online polling. Good. Oh, every time I think it's going to stabilize, it moves a little bit more. So we'll wait one more second or two. So it looks like about half of you have done a lot of quarterly reporting. So this may be more of a review and help you with some of those questions and common issues that come up on them. And then there's about a quarter of you who've done 1 or 2 reports, so it's kind of new for you. And then there's about 20% who have never completed a report. And since that's higher than the number of people who aren't responsible on the call to fill out reports, I'm thinking that those might be some new agencies, or it might be a new job duty for some of the people on the call. So that's wonderful. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Jean now, who's going to talk about the actual VOCA quarterly performance report.
Awesome, thank you, Julie. So now that you guys are a little bit more familiar as to why we have the performance reports, let's talk about the form. Your agency will have a quarterly performance reporting form for each award through our unit. They're all unique to the grants that are funded through our department. This training will only be discussing the VOCA quarterly report. These are the steps that you will need to complete each quarter to submit your VOCA quarterly report. We'll go into more details on each of these steps. You're going to verify that you have the correct form. Complete the demographics tab, complete the direct services tab, complete the scope of work, and verify that your data you entered is accurate. Once you've done all that, you're going to go ahead and submit. And we'll go into very explicit detail over every one of these steps during this training. Step 1, you're going to verify that you have the correct form. This report should have 4 tabs: the Instructions tab, Demographics tab, Direct Services tab, and Scope of Work tab. You're going to go to the Demographic tab and look at the top. You should see your agency name, the grant number for your VOCA award, which should start as a 16575 number. The next thing you're going to see is your grant name should be VOCA Victim Services, and the grant period should be July 1, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. This year's report is going to look a little bit different from last year's. If you have not received your quarterly reporting template for this year yet, you will receive it when you get your fully executed NOSA. If you've received your fully executed NOSA, but are unsure if you've had your quarterly reporting template added to that email, please contact me. My email's in the PowerPoint, and I'll put it up in the chat shortly. I'll be happy to send your quarterly report form after this training if your NOSA is executed. This is what the form's going to look like. At the top, you can see that, or at the bottom, you can see the Demographics tab is selected, and at the top, you can see the award information circled in green. All right. Have you received your VOCA SFY 22 quarterly report template yet? A for yes, B for no, C, I have no idea. Okay, it looks like about 75% of you have received your quarterly reporting. It looks like someone doesn't know if they've received it yet. I don't think you have yet, Ellen. Go ahead and email me just to remind me, and I will go ahead and just double check and see if I can find that if you haven't executed NOSA or not. Okay, so do we have any questions over what we've talked about so far?
I haven't seen any come through the chat, Jean, but people should feel free to ask questions to the chat at any time on anything we've covered in the training.
Yes, please do that. Okay, so we'll move on to the instructions tab. This tab is the only one in this spreadsheet that should be locked. We have left the remaining tabs open as we trust that your agency will not change any of the already populated information in these sections. These sections, the other tabs are derived mostly from what the feds want, so please don't change any of this information. Please read the instructions tab in full. There's a lot of helpful information here that will answer many questions, and if followed correctly, it'll prevent us from requesting an amended report from you. So just make sure that you read the instructions tab in full, and we're going to go ahead and ask a poll question on that. Have any of you ever read the instructions slide on your quarterly report? Please be honest, there's no judgment.
We got a no in the chat and a yes in the chat.
I see that. I said, well, it looks like about 85-ish% of you have actually read the instruction slide on your quarterly report. Awesome, just for the information I needed, then quit reading. I like that, I do that as well. So and it looks like 17% of you haven't read those. That could probably either be because you've just not read them or because you're a new agency and you haven't received them yet. And that's totally fine. I would highly recommend taking a few minutes and reading that instruction tab. It is very helpful, and it will answer a lot of your questions that you might have prior to asking us for the questions. And we are always open and available for questions or concerns that you have on this report. Just know that you do have that other resource too with your instructions tab. And I'm going to go ahead and give it over to Julie to talk about the demographics tab.
All right, so the demographics tab has a new prorating section this year, and we're going to go over that in a lot of detail, and I'm sure you guys will have questions on it. Then it has 9 questions, and we'll go over each of those. And the first 3 are the total number of victims served, new and continuing. Number 2 is the total number of anonymous contacts, and number 3 is the number of individuals reported, how many were new. And we'll go over that in detail too, because determining the new victims is always something that gets people confused. So first, let's talk about prorating. So the OVC requires that all agencies receiving VOCA funding be able to collect and report data on victims served and services supported through their VOCA funding, separate from victims served and services provided through their other funding sources. So because of this, we also encourage all agencies to have a written policy outlining how VOCA reporting will be handled to ensure that it's only reporting on VOCA-funded victims and services. We recommend this because even if you've been doing this for years for your agency and you know how you're prorating and you know how you're making sure that you're counting only the victim services, if you retire, if you get a new job, if you leave, something happens and someone else has to do it, it's great that it's in writing so people know. So just a recommendation if you don't have that policy already. So what can be counted? Victims and services provided with VOCA funding and non-federal match funding. It's important to know that other federal funding cannot be used as match, and victim services provided with that funding cannot be used provided with that funding cannot be used as match. So agencies should be careful that if they're tracking victim services provided with their non-federal funding, to make sure they're not duplicating their count. So for example, if your agency receives FITSA, which is another federal award that Victim Services manages, those funds cannot be used to match VOCA, and the victims and services provided with those funds would not be counted on your VOCA quarterly report. If you're that agency, that same agency that receives FITSA funding is also receiving state funding like marriage license funding, then they would need to be careful to only count the portion that was used to match VOCA if they're using the marriage license funding to match both their FITSA and VOCA grants. So it can get very complicated and confusing. So this can be confusing, and agencies are encouraged to contact us, being myself, to discuss your individual situation and how you can make sure you're reporting correctly. We're here to help. We know that it can be confusing. So I believe I see a question in the chat about SAPTA funding. I believe SAPTA is federal funding and can't be used for match for VOCA because it's federal funding. But I could be wrong. Dean, do you know if SAPTA is federal?
SAPTA is federal funding and cannot be used as match.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you, Dean. All right, so there are 4 options on how you can prorate your report, and we're going to list them in the order that is desired. So if you can do option 1, you can stop listening and not worry about option 2, 3, and 4. If you can't do option 1, then you're going to try to do option 2, and so on. So try to do the one that's the lowest number you can. So option 1 is that your agency can track separately. So your agency has some system that can track by funding source, like an electronic database system that's set up that way, or VOCA clients and services are completely different clients from other funding sources. So some agencies, the services they offer for VOCA are so different, and the clients they serve are different. So it's easy for them to track those clients and services separately. All right, so let's show you that option 1 example. If your agency can track the number of victims served and the services provided that are supported by their VOCA and match funding, then no prorating is needed. The agency will report on all victims served and all services provided with VOCA funding. You can see in this example that the agency would report 80 victims served and 160 services provided with VOCA funding. They would not put the 20 victims served and the 40 services provided with their other non-VOCA funding, because they can track those separately. So now let's go on to option 2, and that's prorating based on staff salary. If an agency has data on the total number of victims served and the total number of services provided, but can't track which victims and or services are supported by VOCA funding versus other funding, then the agency should prorate based on staff salary. So to do that, you're going to take the total staff salary paid by VOCA and add the total victim services staff salary for non-VOCA to get your total victim services program staff salary. Then you're going to take the total staff salary paid by VOCA and divide it by the total victim service program staff salary, and that's going to equal your proration percentage. Then you'll multiply the total victims served and the total services by that proration percentage for your VOCA reporting. So now let's see an example of that. So you can see in this example that the agency can track what portion of each staff member's salary is supported by VOCA and other funding sources. In this example, a staff member is funded at 80% by VOCA plus match, which is $50,000, and 20% through other funding sources, which is $12,500. To get the victim service program staff salary, we add the $50,000 VOCA staff funding to the $12,500 victim services staff salary for non-VOCA, which gives us a total of $62,500. We will now divide the $50,000 VOCA staff funding by the $62,500 total victim services program staff salaries. This gives us 80%. The agency will then attribute 80% of all victims served and 80% of all services on the VOCA quarterly report. You can see at the bottom that the total victims served was 100, and when multiplied by 80%, the agency will report serving 80 victims. You can see that the services were 200 services. Multiplied by that 80% means they will report providing 160 VOCA funded services. All right, so that's option 2. Option 3 is prorating based on direct service budget. This would be used if your agency cannot use option 1 or 2, but can track funding that supports direct victim services apart from funding that supports other types of activities, such as community outreach efforts or training. So VOCA direct service funding would be added to the non-VOCA direct service funding to give you the total victim services direct service funding. Then the VOCA direct service funding would be divided by the total victim services direct services funding to give you your proration rate. And then you would multiply the total victim served and the total services by that proration rate to get your VOCA report number. Okay, so now we're going to see that in example form. So here is the example of example 3. And in this example, you will see that victim services direct services funding is $62,500 direct services VOCA funding, plus the $20,500 of direct services non-VOCA for a total of $83,000. When you divide the $62,500 direct services VOCA funding by the total victim services direct service funding of $83,000, you get the proration percentage of 75%. Therefore, the agency would report 75% of the victims served and 75% of the services provided on the VOCA quarterly report. In this example, we can see that they served 100 victims, so they would report 75, and 200 services, so they would report 150. So the final and least preferred method is prorating based off the victim service program budget. If an agency can track the total number of victims served and total number of services provided, but it cannot track the portion of its budget from direct victim services, then the agency should prorate based on the entire victim service program budget. For agencies that only provide victim services, their victim service program budget may equal the total agency budget. But for agencies that provide many different types of services or programs, their victim service program budget may represent only a portion of their total agency budget. For example, a youth service organization may have a victim services program as well as a program for educational development and family food services. In this case, only the victim services program budget should be used for prorating. This agency can track the funding that supports its entire victim service program. In the example below, the subgrantee's victim assistance subaward plus match is $80,000, which is 70% of its entire victim service program budget of $115,000. Therefore, the agency will allocate 70% of the victims served, which is 70, and 70% of the services provided, which is 140, to the victim assistance subgrant quarterly report. So this year, this is what you'll see on the quarterly report at the top of the first tab, well, the second tab, the demographic tab. The first tab you fill out. We're going to collect the data on what method you use to prorate your agency. So at the top, you'll see these questions. You're going to first mark the method of proration that you use. You see the yellow highlighted section? Simply put an X in the box below the method that you use. If you cannot track your VOCA victims separately from and services from your when it click prorate separately, you can see that box is highlighted in green below. So if you don't have a system that tracks everything separate and you use one of the proration methods, you'll need to submit to us an example of how you calculated that. So your numbers on how you calculated that proration percentage. And lastly, you want to remember to answer the question of which system you use to track individual services. This could be the name of your electronic system that you use, or it could be Excel if you have a more manual tracking system, paper files or something like that. You would type in what system you use in that question. The question got missed a lot where it was on the forum last year, so we're hoping it being here, it won't get missed as often. So now that I've probably lost everybody with all that confusing information, let's ask a poll question. What method will your agency use to prorate your quarterly reporting? A, option 1, you have a system that can track victims and services by funding source. B, option 2, prorated based on staff salary. C, option 3, prorated based on direct victim service budget. Option 4, prorated based off total victim service budget. E, I don't know. So then we got 2 answers in the chat of A, and an answer of E in the chat also. Someone doesn't know, and that's okay. It's confusing. You might have to talk to some other people at your agency and see what is going on. But it looks like most people are going to use option A, which is great. They have a system that can track those separately. So that's good. If you're not sure, you can always reach out to us. We can help you figure it out. I know that proration can be very confusing. So feel free to reach out to us. And about 7% are going to use that option too. So that's great. All right. Do we have any questions? Jean, have you seen any questions?
I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat. We do know that this is a very confusing topic, so if you have questions, if you don't feel comfortable asking them in the chat, you can always email us or call us to ask one-on-one queries. Proration, the explanations sound a lot more complicated than they really are, and they just take a few minutes to kind of understand and really wrap your head around them. But we are available to help as much as we can possibly help with you. But yeah, I have not seen any questions pop up. Please feel free. I am monitoring the chat box, so if you have questions, I will answer them as quickly as I possibly can.
Great, thank you, Jean. I'm going to move on to the demographics section then, so, or the rest of the demographics. So question 1 is the total number of clients served, which includes new and continuing clients, but it does not include anonymous clients. So if you have anonymous clients, usually those are like hotline clients a lot of times, or some type of anonymous clients. You would not count them in question 1. You would put them in question 2, which is for anonymous clients only. And then question 3 is for how many of those clients you reported in question 1 were new. So it's for new clients only. And that means those are the clients that have not received services for the federal fiscal year, and we're going to go over that in just a second. It confuses everybody because the reports are done on the state fiscal year. So agencies are required to maintain backup documentation for all questions in this workbook, and the backup documentation can be copies of intake forms or whatever is utilized to document these numbers. This documentation will be reviewed during monitoring. So you don't have to send it with each of your reports, but we can ask for it when we go for your monitoring. So this tends to confuse most people with the reporting. The biggest difference between the state fiscal year and the federal fiscal year are the reporting dates. So we typically run all our awards on the state fiscal year schedule, but this means that reporting for quarter 2 looks a little different than the other quarters. So the state fiscal year runs July 1 through June 30th, and the federal fiscal year runs October 1st through September 30th. So we run our awards on the state fiscal year, so quarter 1 is at July 1 through September 30th, so that's state fiscal year quarter 1, and that's what we call quarter 1. But that's actually federal fiscal year quarter 4. So the state fiscal year quarter 2, which is October 1st through December 31st, is state fiscal year quarter 2, but it's the first quarter for that federal fiscal year. So all federal fiscal year, so on the report, quarter 2, every client is going to be considered new because it's the first quarter of that federal fiscal year. So you haven't reported them on any of the reports for the federal fiscal year yet. So this pertains to VOCA and VISTA, or we're only talking about the VOCA report here. But we're going to go over this a little more throughout the presentation. And as always, if you have questions, please contact one of us in Victim Services. Our contact information is at the end of the slide, so at the presentation. So we're always available to help you because I know that this can be a confusing point for people. So determining who is new. A new individual are those served for the first time during the federal fiscal year. So remember that federal fiscal year is October 1, 2021 through September 30th, 2022. So ask yourself this question: when was the last time the individual received services from our agency? And was this individual counted new in a previous quarter of this report. So the first quarter report is due in October and should be completed with your continuing services. So if you are new, you don't have to worry about it. Everybody's going to be new. But if you're not a new agency, you have to think about the last 3 reports you submitted and whether you already counted that client as new on one of those reports. So any client that is currently receiving services is continuing, and any new client receiving services for the first time in July through September should be considered new. For quarter 2, that's the start of the federal fiscal year, and the report should have all clients considered new. So if you send me a report for quarter 2 and the total number of victims served doesn't match the total number of new, I will send it back to you for revision. So remember, quarter 2, everybody's new. So question 1 and question 3 should be the same. Now we're going to go over a couple of questions. Oh, yeah, we're going to do some poll questions to see if you guys understand this, because I know it can be confusing. So the victim received services from your agency in 2015. They came back and received services in July of 2021. You are completing your quarter 1 report for July 1, 2021 to September 30th, 2021. How should you count this victim? A, new, B, continuing, C, anonymous, D, would not report that victim at all, or E, I don't know. So someone at least has answered. I can't tell how many people have answered, but the consensus so far in the poll looks like A, new, and I see 2 in the chat that say A, new. So we'll give it about 10 more seconds, see if there's any controversy. Oh, a little bit. Some people think that might be a continuing person. A in the chat, D, some said D, they don't know. That's fine too. Hopefully by the end of the training, you'll understand it. So it looks like most people think that that person should be counted as new. And yes, that's correct. You would count this victim as new because they have not been served by your agency during the federal fiscal year. So since 2015 was a long time ago, they're new. They haven't been seen in that federal fiscal year. So now let's do another question. A victim received services from your agency in June of 2021 and was counted as new on your quarter 4 report. The victim continued to receive services in July of 2021. How should this victim be counted on your quarter 1 report? A, new, B, continuing, C, anonymous, D, would not report at all, or E, I don't know. We got small percentage think A, new, and about 85% think B, continuing. Give people a few more seconds to think about it. Kind of a complicated question. Few B's in the chat. Yep, 3 B's in the chat. All right. So, yes, you're correct. B, it would be continuing. The victim was already counted once during the federal fiscal year on your last report as new, so they wouldn't be new again until the quarter 2 report. So a victim received services from your agency in September of 2021 and was counted as new on your quarter 1 report. The victim continued to receive services in October of 2021. How should this victim be counted on your quarter 2 report? A, new, B, continuing, C, anonymous, D, would not report at all, or E, I don't know. So we see at least 1 or 2 people have put A in the poll. Can't tell how many people have. We have an A and a B in the chat. Oops, we have a B now on the poll. So some A's in the poll, it's B's in the poll, A's and B's in the chat. Okay, it looks like most people in the poll think A. The answer is A, yeah. In quarter 2, everybody should be considered new. Always, 100%. Question 1 and question 3 should be the same on quarter 2. So yes, I know that can be confusing. Jean, I think I saw a question come through.
We did, and I answered it real quick, but we can go back to that real quick. The question was, if we use in-kind match, do we include that as a service? It's not on the scope of work. So it's not necessarily going to be on the scope of work. An in-kind match will not, if it supports the services or support that helps you provide assistance with VOCA, you can use that and include those numbers in your VOCA reporting. Most in-kind match won't be eligible for quarterly reporting, but it does help you with your actual match for budget or for VOCA budget. If you have specific questions or unsure how to include your match in with your VOCA reporting, go ahead and email us. Those are kind of more specific to each individual organization, so have to be answered on a one-on-one basis. Do you want to add anything
Great.
to that, Julie?
Yeah, so the things that you would really be tracking to count as a match for services would be if you had volunteers that were providing direct services to individuals that are victims, or if you got in-kind donations that were given out to victims, like donated food cards or gas cards, those things would be reported. But if you're matching like operational costs like rent and those kind of things, they would kind of not be counted on your quarterly report. I hope that makes sense. But hopefully as we go through the direct services tab in a little bit, you'll understand more of what gets reported and think about how that might apply to your agency. And like Jean said, we're always here to discuss individual situations with you because everybody's kind of different. All right, so more of the demographics tab. So questions 5, 6, and 7. This is just kind of a summary of who you should be reporting on each of these questions. So this might be helpful to you when you're looking at them, and then we'll go through them all in more detail. So questions 5, 6, and 7 should only be reported on the new individuals. So you look for those green boxes. And we'll explain that when we look at the next tab. And question 8 should be reported on all victims, new and continuing, and they should be counted in multiple victimization categories. This is a missed thing on a lot of reports. So question 8 is the victimization section, and we'll go over that in detail too. Question 9 asks how many were counted as more than one type of victimization, how many individuals served reported more than one type of victimization. This is an often missed question. People just don't like to answer question 9. They just skip right over it. So we'll go over that too. And then question 10 should be answered on all individuals, new and continuing. So don't just answer it on the new, it should be all individuals that you're serving. And I see question 4 would be new only, right? Also right. So the new format, question 4, oh, I think I had that slide is incorrect. We will need to fix that. That should be question 4, 5, and 6 for the first one. And then question 7, 8, and 9. They're all one question off. So good catch. Thank you for noticing that. Yeah. So we will fix that and send that out when we send out the frequently asked questions and the link to the video. Way to pay attention. Good job. So questions 4, 5, and 6, not 5, 6, and 7, are race, ethnicity, gender, identity, and age, and should all total what you answered on question 3, new clients. And when you look to the right of the question, so you see question 4 says race, ethnicity, and then in parentheses it says new only. All the ones that want you to report on new only will say that. If it doesn't say that, it should be all the individuals you serve, new, continuing, and anonymous. So you'll see on 4, 5, and 6 it says new only. The total row is designated to indicate green if you got the correct numbers that matches what you answered on question 3, and red if you need to fix it. So please don't submit a report with a red box or reach out to us before submitting it, because you're going to need a revision most likely if it's turning red. Every once in a while the report errors, but if it's red, there might be a problem, so you need to contact us. And then you'll also want to notice on question 5, there's other ones that are like this, but there's specification boxes off to the right. And this year, a new thing we did was, oh, I have an arrow, is that we added a specification box for each quarter. There used to just be a specification box, just one for the whole year, and you'd have to delete your last ones and put your new ones, and it was hard to tell if people had remembered to answer it. So now we have one for each quarter, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. So then another thing I wanted to talk about on these demographics is that the difference between not reported and not tracked. So not reported means your agency has a method for collecting this data field, but the victim declined to answer the question, either verbally or in writing. And then not tracked means your agency does not track this data field either for all victims or victims receiving a certain service. For example, if your agency ran a hotline and a domestic violence shelter and does not collect age information on hotline calls, but does for victims staying in the shelter, the age category for all hotline victims, hotline-only victims would be not tracked. Where if you had someone who stayed in the shelter and declined to answer, that would be not reported. So hopefully that makes sense, the difference between those. Realized we had never clarified that for people. The next question on the demographics is the victimization section. And for the victimization section, you're going to put the total amount of victimizations presented during the quarter. The victims can and do sometimes present with multiple victimizations. So you're going to enter them all here. The total of the section should be greater than or equal to the total of question 1 plus question 2. So all the new and continuing people and anonymous people, you want to put what type of victimization for all of them. And if the total row is red, then you haven't reported enough people. There's a problem. If it's green, then that means you reported enough people. So that is good. Remember, if an individual reported 3 types of victimization, you will count them in all 3 categories. So if you have someone who reports that they were the victim of domestic and family violence and robbery and stalking and harassment, you would put a 1 in each category for that person. Also remember, no category can be greater than the total number of victims you serve. That means if you reported the agency served 100 victims that quarter, no victimization category can have a number higher than 100, as each person can only be counted once in each category. So why they can be counted in multiple categories, they can't be counted more than once in the same. So if they report elder abuse, you can only count them once in the elder abuse. They're only one person. So no category can have higher than that number of total served. Hopefully that makes sense. So this one also has specified sections on 2 of them. So if you put a number in the other section or in the hate crime section, that needs further clarification, and there's a specified box on the right for the question, and you must put the specification in that box if you put something other than 0. For example, if you enter 1 for hate crime, please specify what is being identified as a hate crime. This can have multiple explanations, but they need to be identified. All right. That's all I wanted to say there. So the definitions of victimization, OVC has provided those to us. They are at the end of this presentation. We didn't want to bore you all by reading them all and make this training 4 hours. So please take some time to read them and see what falls under each of those victimization categories. It's interesting. You might find that some things qualify that you've been putting in other. And again, remember to specify. So if you reported that you saw 100 victims, so question 8 is often skipped. People do not like to answer this question. I don't know why, or they put an answer in here that does not make sense. So if you reported you saw 100 victims during the quarter in question 1 and 0 anonymous victims in question 2, but your total victimization section on question 8 was 110, that means no more than 10 victims could have reported more than one type of victimization, as you should be reporting them in all types of victimization that they reported. Or if you said you saw 100 victims and then the victimization section adds up to 100, the number of individuals reporting more than one type should be 0 because they're equal. So for it to be more than that, you have to have reported more than that for those individuals. Hopefully that makes sense. So then the last question on the demographics tab is special classifications. And you want to remember to count these for all new, continuing, and anonymous claims, not just the new victims. So you notice that it doesn't say new to the right of that 9 special classifications of individuals. So let's go to a few questions to see how we did at explaining this. Gender should count. A, new victims only. B, continuing victims only. C, anonymous victims only. D, all victims, new, continuing, and anonymous. Or E, none of the above. So looks like everybody in the poll so far has answered A, and we have some A's in the chat. Oh, we have a B in the chat. Oh, B on the poll, A's in the chat, and 1 D in the chat. Oh, everybody changed their answer in the poll to A. So yeah, the answer is A, new only, and it will say that right next to the question. So just make sure you look for that. So on question 7, victimization, that should count. A, new victims only. B, continuing victims only. C, anonymous victims only. D, all victims, new, continuing, and anonymous. Or E, none of the above. And Jean did give a helpful hint that you can look at the form for assistance with these questions. If you want a little help, we see a D in the chat for this too. And about 10% reporting A in the poll, and about 90% with D. Give people a few more seconds to answer. They want to flip to their report, it takes a little bit longer. Another D in the chat, so that's good. All right, so all victims should be counted, new, continuing, and anonymous. And you'll know this because it doesn't say new only. So if it doesn't say new only, that means count everyone. The next one is victims should only be counted once in question 7, which is the victimization question, regardless of how many types of victimization they report. Is that true or false? Ooh, got a 50-50 split on the fast responders. It's gone down to about 13% true, 90% false now, higher. Oh, about 15 to 85% right now. Not seeing any answers for true or false yet in the chat. Jean is seeking chat box answers. And the poll is changing a little bit more. So I see a false and a true in the chat. So it's all been switched to false on the poll. People have switched their answers. They've caved to peer pressure, but they're right. False. Victims should be counted once in each type of victimization they report. So the number of victimization category can be huge. So if you saw 100 people, it could be like 600 in the victimization category if everybody reported 6 types of victimization. So don't worry if that number is large, it can be large. Do you have any questions? I think I saw some questions come through as I was chatting away, Jean.
I actually didn't see any. I was just kind of commenting as you were talking that, you know, VOCA operates on the federal fiscal year. So all clients in Q2 would be new, just a reminder. And the definitions for the victimizations, they're extremely helpful and they're very interesting on how OBC defines victimization. So if you're bored one day or, you know, just kind of wondering about what they think of it, that's a great opportunity to kind of look at that. We did have a question pop up while we were chatting just now. So victimizations count all of fiscal year July 1 through June 30th. Do you want to answer that, Julie?
So, yeah, so you're going to report the victimization for each quarter. So For each quarter, you're going to report all the victimizations for all the individuals you served that quarter. So if you served an individual each quarter of the fiscal year, yeah, they would be counted each time, each quarter in all the fiscal years. But if you only served them in one quarter, they would only be reported on that quarter. I hope that makes sense. That makes sense, Jean? Do you have anything to add?
I feel like it makes sense. Let us know if you need more clarification or to state it a little differently. Sometimes things need to be explained just a little bit differently to kind of understand them. So if you need more clarification on any of this, just let us know and we can kind of go over it another way.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions or any follow-up on that. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Jean, to talk about the direct services.
Excellent. So now we're going to complete the direct services tab. We're going to answer these questions for all individuals served. This would be new, continuing, and anonymous clients. Remember that this should be only VOCA or prorated for VOCA, like we talked about earlier. This tab is divided into 7 categories: victim compensation, information and referral, personal advocacy and accompaniment, emotional support or safety services, shelter, housing services, criminal or civil justice system assistance, and public presentations or community education. You'll see that this year that colors have been added to the Direct Services tab to assist you in completing these sections. We've also added helpful tips on the right side of each section to help. We will review each of these as we go throughout each section in detail. You're going to hear a lot of repetitive information. It's repeated for a reason. The Direct Services tab should be completed on the services all individuals served during the quarter received. These are new, continuing, and anonymous clients. This is the tab where most data issues occur. So please take a few minutes and just pay attention to what we're going over. I know it sounds a little repetitive, but it is very important. First thing we're going to talk about is victim compensation. This section is the only direct services category that does not ask for individuals served and services provided. It only asks for individuals. You're going to count the number of victims assisted with a victim compensation application. VOCA Comp is different than VOCA funding that your agencies are providing to victims. This provides immediate financial assistance to qualified victims of violent crimes that occur in Nevada. The application for VOCA Comp can be located at voc.nv.gov. We will put on a training about VOCA Comp later in this year. As a VOCA-funded agency, you must inform all victims you serve that might be eligible about VOCA compensation program and assist those that are interested in completing an application. Please note that not all victims will be eligible. For example, if a victimization was not a violent crime, or if the crime occurred out of Nevada, or if the crime occurred over 2 years ago, they would not be eligible. All eligible victims might not be interested in applying for the program, and that's okay. For example, some clients don't want to file a police report, which is a requirement for this program. You're only going to count the victims that you assisted to complete the application on this quarterly report. Do not count that those you simply told about the program that did not qualify or did not want to apply for compensation. Only the people that you actually assisted in applying for the compensation. Remember, the number you report in this section can never be larger than the total number of victims that you served during the quarter, and you can see that reminder to the right of this tab. The next section is information and referral. This section will follow the format of all other sections in the Direct Services tab. You'll see that the first question on line 12 will ask for the number of individuals providing services in this category during this quarter. We've colored these sections slightly darker than the following ones asking about the actual services. The first question on line 12 should count individuals only once, regardless of how many services they received. A1 through A4 should count the total number of services that were provided to those victims. An example of this is if a victim received information about the criminal justice process from your agency once, and then referrals to other victim services programs 3 other times. They would be counted as one individual on line 12, even though they received 2 types of services. One service would be counted on A1 as the agency provided one of the services, and 3 services would be counted on A3 because that service was provided 3 times. Remember not to just add the services to get the total service, because that would give you the wrong number of 4 individuals served when only 1 individual was served. Also, remember to count each time you provided the service, even if the same individual received the same service multiple times. The number served in a category can never be greater than the total number of individuals served on the demographic tab line on 19. Since each individual must receive at least 1 service in this category to be counted on line 12, the sum of A1 through A4 must be equal to or greater than the number of individuals reported on line 12. This is because if each individual only received 1 service, then the sum of A1 to A4 would equal the number of individuals served. But if any individuals received more than 1 service, the sum of A1 through A4 will be greater than the number of individuals reported. Now we're going to review the definition of each type of service in this particular category. As we go through the definition of services in each of the sections, please think about which of these services your agency offers, how you are counting and tracking them, and how you would report them. Information about the criminal justice process. This is when you inform victims about the criminal justice system and process, and it could include information on how to file a police report, how to request a protective order, or how a case might progress through the legal system. This service includes explanation of legal terminology. In addition, this includes post-sentencing services and information regarding assistance with property returns. Information about victim rights and how to obtain notification, A2. Informing the victim about the existence of the Federal Crime Victim Rights Act of 2004, state laws regarding victim rights, and state victim compensation programs, and or the victim notification system. This is where you would count informing a victim about the victim compensation program, even if they decided not to complete an application. Also, if you tell the victim about the VINE system, that would be counted in this service as well. A3, referral to other victim service programs. Referring victims to other victim service providers if their specific agency lacks capacity to provide needed support. This could also occur if another agency is better able to provide that type of service, developmentally or culturally appropriate services, or services that correlate with the offense experienced. A4, this is referral to other services, supports, and resources. Referring a victim to other services to meet a victim's needs. This includes assessment of service needs and provisions of referrals or providing victims with information and contacts to obtain services on their own. I also want to point out that this is where assisting a victim to apply for the Confidential Address Program, also known as CAP, would be counted. Do we have any questions over anything that we've talked about up to this point?
I haven't seen any come through yet, Dean.
Okie dokie. Well, we will continue on in the next category of direct services, which is personnel advocacy and accompaniment. You can see that it is structured the same way as the information and referral section, with line 18 asking for the number of individuals who received services in this category, and B1 through B10 asking for the number of services offered in this category. You will see on the right that it has the same rules as the previous section, that the number of individuals receiving services in the category cannot be greater than the total number of victims on the demographic tab, line 19. And the sum of the services in B1 through B10 must be equal to or greater than the number of individuals reported for that category on line 18 on this page. Now let's go over the service definitions in this category. B1 is victim advocacy accompaniment to emergency medical care. This is when you would coordinate and help a victim to obtain emergency medical care. This includes emotional and or physical support during the care, not the actual care. B2 is victim advocacy accompaniment to medical forensic exam. Coordinating or helping a victim to obtain a forensic interview or medical forensic exam. This includes emotional and or physical support during the forensic interviews or medical forensic exam. This does not include the actual exam. B3 is law enforcement interview, advocacy, or accompaniment. You will notice that this is on both the personnel advocacy and accompaniment and in the criminal civil justice system assistance. This is when you're going to coordinate or help a victim prepare for an interview with law enforcement. This includes emotional and or physical support during interviews with law enforcement. You're going to notice it in both of these categories because not everybody is going to assist people with criminal civil justice system assistance and personal advocacy and accompaniment. It's up to your agency, if you do provide both of these services, that you report law enforcement interview, advocacy, and accompaniment only once in whichever category best applies to your particular organization. B4, individual advocacy. This is when you're going to help a victim access needed services beyond providing just the information or referral. This may include assistance in recovering property collected as evidence, assistance in managing practical issues created by the victimization, or accompanying the victim to appointments with social services. B5 is the performance of medical or non-medical forensic exam or interview, or medical and evidence collection. This is when you actually perform or conduct the forensic exam, interview, or medical evidence collection in accordance with any requirements or guidelines identified by the applicable jurisdiction. Individuals performing these exams, interviews, or collection should be trained to conduct these activities in a trauma-informed and developmentally and culturally appropriate manner. You'll notice that B3 was accompaniment to medical forensic exam, but B5 is being the actual agency that performs the exam. It's very important to make sure that those two are clearly identified. B6 is immigration assistance. This is when you're going to provide assistance for refugee and immigrant victims with specific immigration issues. B7 is intervention with employer, creditor, landlord, or academic institution. Advocating for a victim to secure rights, remedies, and services from non-criminal justice system providers on behalf of the victim. This includes responding to requests for records from other service providers, intervening with employers, school administrators, creditors, bill collectors, and landlords on behalf of the victim. This also includes advocacy to help the victim maintain financial and or academic stability in the aftermath of the victimization. B8 is child or dependent care assistance, and this would include coordination of these services. So coordinating and or providing the actual child care so that a victim may participate in the criminal justice process or any other public proceedings arising from the crime or attended victim service appointments or counseling sessions. B9 is transportation assistance. This would also include coordination of transportation assistance so that a victim can attend court hearings or medical appointments or access emergency or agency services. Staff members transporting victims, taxis, or rideshare such as Uber or Lyft, and public transportation are included. B10 are interpreter services. This is when you're going to provide communication services for victims that have a limited English proficiency or a disability that affects their ability to communicate. This includes translating using sign language or providing Braille. In addition, this includes a language line, texting, or distributing translated documents, as well as translations provided via staff or volunteers, or a contract with an outside agency or service. Do we have any questions going on about what we've talked about so far?
I haven't seen any come through yet, Dee.
Alrighty. The next category is emotional support of safety services. You can see that it is structured the same way as the two previous sections we've already talked about. Looks like line 30 is asking for the number of individuals who received services in this category, and C1 through C7 are asking for the number of services offered in the category. You'll see on the right that it has the same rules as the previous sections, and that the number of individuals receiving services cannot be greater than the total number of victims on the demographic tab. And the sum of the services in C1 through C7 must be equal to or greater than the number of individuals reported for that category. Now let's go over the service definitions in this category. C1 is crisis intervention, in-person, safety planning, etc., communicating among professionals and victims regarding activities resulting from the victimization. This includes actions necessary to expedite a case for victim protection, initiation of legal actions needed to protect the victim, such as probation, revocation, or other things. C2 is hotline or crisis line counseling, providing live hotline services by trained professionals or volunteers. These services may be provided via telephone, instant messaging, mobile application, or website. Individuals may be identified or may be anonymous contacts. C3 is on-site crisis response. These are providing immediate in-person crisis intervention, emotional support, guidance, and counseling. These services must occur at the scene of a crime, immediately after a crime, or become immediately necessary due to the crime. C4 is individual counseling, providing psychological, psychiatric, and/or other counseling-related treatment for individuals, couples, and family members. This service, this service must be provided by a person who meets professional standards to provide these services in the jurisdiction in which the care is administered. Support groups is C5. These can be facilitated or peer, providing or facilitating support group activities led by staff or peers. These can include group counseling sessions, peer support groups, or other groups that bring victims together to aid in the healing process. C6 is other therapy. You're going to provide therapy not covered in the individual counseling or support group categories above to improve and promote healing that responds to the emotional, social, financial, or physical needs to the victim. These must be based on targeted needs of individual victim and provided by the agency. C7 is emergency financial assistance, providing cash outlays for food, clothing, short-term alternative emergency housing such as hotel due to capacity at the shelter, or other support services such as toiletries provided to the primary and secondary victim. Emergency financial assistance may also include emergency loans, payments for items such as food and/or clothing, changing windows and/or locks, taxis, prophylactic and non-prophylactic medications, durable medical equipment, and other similar items allowable under the program guidelines. Please remember to check if these items are allowed on your award. VOCA has a lot of gray areas, and there are a lot of regulations about many of the services listed on this definition. Before you administer this assistance, unless you know for sure that it's an approved VOCA cost, please, any questions, just contact myself or Julie, and we're very happy to make sure that we verify whether or not that is an approved service or support that VOCA will reimburse for. Do we have any questions so far over what we've talked about?
Not yet. We have a quiet group today.
We really do. I feel like I'm putting everybody to sleep. All right, we'll go on to the next category. It's shelter and housing services. You can see that it is structured the same way as the previous sections. Can you guys see a pattern here, what seems to be one of the biggest problems on this tab? So line 39 is asking for the number of individuals who received services in this category, and D1 through D3 is asking for the number of services in this category. You'll see on the right that it has the same rules, and that the sum of the services in D1 through D3 must be equal to or greater than the number of individuals reported for the category. Now let's go over the service definitions in this category real quick. D1 is emergency shelter or safe house. You're providing emergency short-term shelter to individuals and families following victimization. This is asking for the number of bed nights that you provide to your clients. D2 is transitional housing. This is when you're going to provide temporary housing for victims who, due to the nature of victimization, cannot safely return to their former housing and need more time to stabilize themselves before living independently. Please note that referrals to transitional housing should be counted under Section A, Information and Referral. D3 is relocation assistance. This includes assistance with obtaining housing. You're going to coordinate assistance with rental expenses, utility deposits, security deposits, and/or moving fees. These include assistance locating long-term housing for the victims, regardless of distance, based on safety of need.
So, Jean, we got a question in. Would D1 include overnight hotel lodging?
Yes, because that would be considered a bed night, emergency housing, we are aware that many agencies don't operate an actual shelter. So the hotel motel nights that you have for your victims would definitely be included in those bed nights D1. Okay?
Great.
Thank you. The next category is criminal civil justice system assistance. You can see that it is also structured the same way as in previous sections, with line 44 asking for the number of individuals who received services in this category, and E1 through E11 asking for the number of services offered in this category. You'll see to the right it has the same rules, and that the total number of victims on the demographic tab and the sum of the services in E1 through E11 must be equal to or greater than the number of individuals reported for the category. Now we're going to go over the service definitions in this category. E1 is the notification of criminal justice events, like case status, arrest, court proceedings, case disposition, release, etc. Communicating with the victims to notify them of hearings and appearances, the defendant's release from jail, the status of the case, bond hearings, grand jury decisions, dispositions options, appellate decisions, etc. This includes assisting victims in contacting probation or parole offices, community supervision, Department of Corrections, and other things. To get information of any changes in the convicted defendant's status. E2 is the victim impact statement assistance. This is when you're going to assist the victim to prepare an impact statement and assistance on receiving and submitting their statement. This also includes preparing supporting letters, registering for impact panels, facilitating participation in clemency hearings, and other victim impact statement assistance processes. Assistance with restitution is E3, and this is when you're going to assist victims in requesting restitution when collection efforts are not successful. E4 is civil legal assistance in obtaining protection order or restraining order. This is when you're going to advise and or actually assist a victim in obtaining the protection or restraining order, as well as any follow-up hearings associated with finalizing such order. This is different from when you're just telling them that they have that option available or how to do it. This is actually assisting them to do that. E5 is civil legal assistance with family law issues. This is when you're going to actually assist with custody and visitation support or other family law issues. Providing legal assistance that cannot be classified as another type of service in this category is E6, other emergency justice related assistance. E7, immigration assistance. This is when you're providing assistance for refugee and immigrant victims with a specific immigration issues such as obtaining a visa. E8 is prosecution, interview, advocacy, and accompaniment. It includes accompaniment with prosecuting attorney and with victims or witnesses. Providing emotional support and or physical accompaniment in preparation for and or during interviews with prosecutors or other agents for prosecutorial investigation. E9 is law enforcement interview, advocacy, and accompaniment. We did see this above in the information and referral, I believe it was information and referral. We noticed this in the personnel advocacy and accompaniment. There are a lot of tabs. So again, this one, if your organization mostly focuses on criminal civil justice system activities, then you would go ahead and do this law enforcement interview, advocacy, and accompaniment in this section and not in the personal advocacy and accompaniment. If your agency does not provide criminal civil justice system assistance, then your best place to put this particular information would be in the personal advocacy and accompaniment section. E10 is criminal advocacy and accompaniment. This is when you're going to provide support, assistance, accompaniment, and or advocacy to victims at any stage of the criminal justice process. This includes filing an initial police report, a testimony, post-sentencing services, and support. E11 is other legal advice and or counseling. This is when you're going to provide legal advice not captured in any of the above categories. This could include converting ex parte protection order to permanent orders, eviction or adversary employment actions arising from the victimization, or responding to requests for records by the courts. Civil matters related to the victimization are also included, such as custody, dependency, juvenile court actions. Do you have any questions? I think I saw a couple pop up there.
Yeah, we saw some come in. So we got a question that said, if agency has 2 housing programs plus a shelter, do we count all of the nights? And I said, yes, you would count all the nights. And then I thought about it and I said, housing might not be emergency, all housing might not be emergency shelter. So if they were emergency shelter, they would be counted under D1. And so then the follow-up question was, so housing nights for victims in housing programs and don't include shelter nights. So shelter nights would be D1, and housing program would be D2. And I recommended that the person reach out to us to discuss the specifics of their housing program to see if they better fit in D1, which is emergency shelter, or D2, which is transitional housing. I don't know if you have anything to add to any of that, Jean?
Yeah, it seems from the conversation that the agency is providing both emergency shelter bed nights and transitional or their housing program bed nights. So you would count them separately. So anything that you're doing for an emergency shelter would typically be short-term emergency need to just get the victim out of a terrible situation. The transitional housing is going to be something that's more long-term that you're going to assist that victim with. Generally, if you're not going to provide transitional housing, you're providing some sort of relocation assistance. So any of that would be counted in any one of the D1, 2, or 3 categories. It's just has to be specific on what is going on with that particular person with those services. I hope that clarifies. If you have like specific questions pertaining to your organization, please go ahead and reach out to us and we can help you figure out where things would go for your particular organization. But I'm hoping that clarifies the emergency shelter versus transitional housing question a little bit better.
Yeah, I think you did a good job of that, Jean. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do you have any other questions that we've talked about so far? I know it's a lot of information and we're probably all on overload.
I haven't seen any come through. It's good to know a few people are asking questions and still awake.
You know, this is a really intense training, so we appreciate that you guys taking the time to pay attention to it. There's a lot of information in here. The last category we're going to talk about is on the direct services tab is public presentation, and it's structured differently than the other previous categories. On line 57, it's asking for the total number of presentations provided during the reporting period. Then line 58 is asking for how many participants attended those presentations. 59 is asking for how many presentations were targeting adults. 60 were targeting youth, and 61, how many were targeting just a general audience. Each presentation should be only counted once on line 59, 60, or 61. For example, if you had a presentation that was for all ages, adults and youth, you would count it only on line 61. You would not count that presentation on line 59 or 60. So sum of line 59, 60, and 61 should be the number of presentations reported on line 57. Do we have any questions pop up on the public presentation one?
No, just a comment that they may have to re-watch the recording to make sure they got it all, but they're thankful for all the details because quarterlies can sometimes be confusing.
Yes, quarterlies can be very confusing. So we've got poll questions now. These are going to be fun. And I'll post the poll thing up. Which type of victims should be reported on the direct services tab? New victims, continuing victims, anonymous victims, all victims, new, continuing, and anonymous, or none of the above? All right, looks like we have answer D for everybody. We've got a couple A's popping in. Give it another couple seconds.
Sorry.
That's all good. We move forward. The answer is D, all victims, new, continuing, and anonymous. And we did have a question pop up. If you provide to a professional that is an adult, I'm assuming that the public presentation professional that's an adult, that would be considered adult. So if you need a different clarification for that, Maxine, go ahead and clarify your question a little bit. That's just what my understanding is from what you're asking. But yeah,
that's how I took
it. Okay, perfect. All right, so we're going to have a scenario, and then I'm going to give it.
She said, like for medical staff. So yeah, if you give a public presentation to medical staff or another organization, that would be to adults. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, Dee. Now you can go on.
You're great. Okay. So we're going to go over a scenario, and I'll reread the scenario through the next few questions while Julie asks the questions, because you'll forget the scenario after 2 questions, I promise. So an agency that runs a domestic violence shelter has a woman and her 2 children enter the shelter and stay for 30 nights. During her stay, the woman also received assistance locating housing. The woman was also provided with information on how to file a temporary protection order. Julie?
So how many individuals should the agency report on line 39 of the report? Total number of individuals who receive services in shelter/housing service category. A, 1, B, 0, C, 3, D, 90, or E, none of the above. And I see that we have a C in the chat and 2 C's in the chat and some A's and some C's in the poll. To give people a few more seconds to answer. All right, so most people think it's C, and yeah, the answer is C, 3. The woman and her 2 children would be counted as they all receive shelter services. So just quick note, you would want to make sure that the children were also counted in the demographic tab. You don't want to count anybody in the direct services tab that was not counted on the demographic tab. So here's the next question. In scenario 1 that Jean read, what number should be reported for D1, emergency shelter or safe house? A, 0, B, 30, C, 3, D, 90, or E, none of the above. And Jean will read the scenario again as you guys think about this one too.
Yeah, so the scenario is an agency that runs a domestic violence shelter has a woman and her 2 children enter the shelter and stay for 30 nights. During her stay, the woman also received assistance locating housing. The woman was also provided with information on how to file a temporary protection order.
So how many would you answer for D1, emergency shelter or safe house? We have,
and remember that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dee.
Sorry, remember that D1, emergency shelter or safe house, is considered bed night.
Yeah, it's a service. Everything with a letter in front of it is going to be a service. So you want to remember that with the letters, you're counting services, and with the numbers, you're counting people. So that changed the results a lot. Jean's big hint helped everybody. So it went 9% think 40, 9% think 3, and about 82% think 90. And we got some final answers in the chat. So yeah, the answer is 90. 30 nights of shelter for the woman and 30 nights of shelter for each of her children. So 30 times 3 is 90 nights. We see this messed up on a lot of reports where either a lot of places only give each victim 1 night of shelter, or we're counting the number of people who stayed in the shelter in 2 different lines instead of the number of shelter nights. And I think it was never really clarified on our part, so I think that's our part as a failure as a trainee. For the agencies, not agency failure to report, I think that was on us. So hopefully this is a new thing that people have learned. All right, so I'm going to read the next question, and then Jean will read the scenario again. So in scenario 1, the agency also provided D3, relocation assistance, and should count this service on their report, true or false. Did they do that? Do you remember in the scenario? Jean's going to read it.
So in the scenario, an agency that runs a domestic violence shelter has a woman and her 2 children enter the shelter and stay for 30 nights. During her stay, the woman also received assistance locating housing. The woman was also provided with information on how to file a temporary protection order. I think we've all got this one. That's awesome.
Yeah, 100% think true and 100% true in the chat. Yeah, that's true. So I put this in here because when I started, I thought that relocation assistance was only if you paid for victims to be relocated or help them with those relocation costs. No, if you help them with the search or help them with information on trying to find permanent housing, that's relocation assistance. So that's something I learned later on, not when I first started the reporting. So I thought maybe some of you might not know that, but you all knew it. You're all great. So the next one is, in the scenario 1, what other direct service category did the woman receive services in? A, information and referral. B, personal advocacy and accompaniment. C, emotional support or safety services. D, criminal justice system assistance. Or E, none of the above. And Jean's going to read it again for you guys.
An agency that runs a domestic violence shelter has a woman and her 2 children enter the shelter and stay for 30 nights. During her stay, the woman also received assistance locating housing. The woman was also provided with information on how to file a temporary protection order.
All right, so I'm seeing 20% think A, and some B's now, and some B's, and some A's and B's in the chat. So this is a
tricky question. Mm-hmm.
So the answer is actually A, information and referral. Since they did not say that the agency provided the woman with assistance getting a TPO, just with information on the process, that would fall under A1. That would be the best fit for the service they provided. So.
Yeah, if the agency actually provided the assistance in getting the TPO, then yes, that would be answer D. But because they were only providing the information on how to file a TPO, then it would just be the information and referral section.
Perfect. Okay, another question on the scenario. How many individuals should be counted on line 12? Total number of individuals who receive services in the information and referral category. Should it be A, 1, B, 0, C, 3, or D, 30? Or E, none of the above?
So the agency runs a domestic violence shelter and has a woman and her 2 children enter the shelter and stay for 30 nights. During her stay, the woman also received assistance locating housing. The woman was also provided with information on how to file a temporary protection order. So the woman was provided with information on how to file a temporary protection order.
Okay, people are changing their answer based on how you read that, Jean. So we have about 90% think A1 and about 10%, 20% now think C. We have some A and C in the chat. So the answer is A. So even though the woman has children, this service was only provided to the adults, so she would be the only one counted. So the agency most likely did not talk to the children about their rights and how to file a TPO. They only provided that service to the adult, to the female. So hopefully that makes sense. We did get a question come through, and I wanted to read it out loud so that everybody got the same information. So if we provide a gas card, would that count as relocation assistance? And my answer is it depends on the purpose of the gift card. If the gift card was to help to get the victim to a new location where they have safe housing, then that gas card would count as relocation assistance. But if the gas card was to help the victim get to court or get to work, then that would not count as relocation assistance. Jean, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, that's a perfect explanation.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the situation. All right, any other questions? Okay, we're going to talk about the next tab, the scope of work tab, step 4. This tab looks different for each agency. And the tab is based on what you put in your scope of work that was in your approved notice of subaward, or NOSA. So if you need changes, if you're having a hard time reporting on the things you said you were going to report on, let us know. We can do a subaward amendment and get it changed. But yeah, that's where we got those. We didn't just make them up. The scope of work tab looks a little different this year. We made a few changes to this tab. The tab now displays the goal number and objective numbers that the item was taken from your NOSA, and it shows the target number, what your goal is for the year, for the award period that was listed on your NOSA. So this is what it looks like. Any questions about the scope of work tab? It's kind of hard to cover that because it's going to be different for every agency, but yeah, not seeing any. So I'm going to move on to the next section, which is for Jean to cover, which is step 5.
We're going to verify that the data is accurate now that we've filled out all of our tabs. So you're going to take a look at your demographics tab. Are there any cells shaded red? Do you specify any answers that required specification? If those answers are positive, like so there are not any cells shaded red, and you did specify any answers that required a specification, then you're going to look at your direct services tab. Do you have any service counts for all services categories that your agency offers? If you don't, make sure that you fill them all out. You're going to check the notes on the side to make sure your numbers meet the requirements. It looks like we had a question pop in. Doesn't slide 92, page 104 of your accompanying presentation contradicts the instructions tab on the direct services tab? I would have to look at that. You're going to check that everybody on the demographics tab on line 19 was counted in at least one category on the direct services tab. So direct service tab line 12, 18, 30, 39, and 44 must be greater than or equal to the demographic tab on line 19. You're going to check for changes from the previous quarter. When we say significant increase or decrease, we're looking at changes of 10% or more. So did any of your service increase significantly, like by 10%? If they did and your data is accurate, please note this and the reason in your email when you're submitting your report. And then did any of the services decrease significantly? If they did and your data is accurate, also please note it. Are there any sections missing or not completed?
So I think the question was probably about that top line, which confuses people about making sure that you report enough people on the direct services tab. Because you have to report everybody new, continuing, and anonymous, and you have been counted as getting a direct, or as being counted as served in that quarter. So to report them on the demographic tab means they have to have received at least one service on the direct services tab. So a lot of problems we get is that when we add the direct services tab, the number of people served is less than the number of people you say you served for the quarter, and then we can't enter it into the federal database. It like pings at us and says there's an error, won't let us enter it. So I think a lot of this is sometimes people only report direct services for people who are new, or maybe they're providing services that aren't listed on the direct services tab, but they're still counting them on the VOCA report. So I'm not sure where those errors are coming from, but it is something that I have to send a lot of reports back for. Jean, did you want to clarify that at all?
No, it can be a little bit confusing. Basically, the categories on your direct services, you don't have to serve everybody in information and referral and advocacy and emotional support. What we're looking for is that if you're helping people in information and referral and advocacy and criminal civil justice systems, those numbers should all add up to the line, I believe it is 819 on your demographics tab. So
I think I understood what she's confused about, Jean. Sorry.
Okay. No, you're good.
So you can't, in any service category, you can't serve more people than the total of those that you serve for the quarter. But your total people that you serve on the direct services tab can look like more than 19 because individuals might get services in multiple categories. So that's why it must be equal to or greater than the number you reported on the demographic tab, because all those categories, like maybe everybody you served that quarter was served in every category. So then it would be 5 times the number you reported on line 19, but in any case, it would be greater. And no one category would have a number bigger than the total number that you saw. Hopefully that makes sense. Dean, did I explain that in a way that made sense?
I think so. If you find that you're having difficulty filling out the form or you're not sure if you're doing it correctly, you can always schedule to meet with us on a one-to-one, and we're happy to walk through it with you, with your data. Do you want any other further clarification, or are there any other questions? So the question is, Direct Services tab, line 12, should be the total number of individuals served in that category. That is correct. While line 19 of the Demographics tab is the total of individuals served in any capacity in this grant. Yes, that is correct. So for example, let's say you served 20 people total. So on your Demographics tab, you're going to serve, 20 individuals on line 19. Of those 20, 10 of them received information and referral, and 15 of them received personal advocacy and accompaniment. Just because those numbers are different than the line 19 doesn't mean it's wrong. Sometimes you're gonna give somebody information and then you're gonna provide advocacy, or while you're providing the advocacy, you're gonna give them information. It's individual based off the needs of the victim. So you wanna make sure that you're just documenting that correctly. But yes, you do have it understood correct in your question.
Okay, if we have follow-up questions on that, just put it in the chat and we'll move on so we can come back to it.
Okay, perfect. So we do note that this is extremely different from what you're used to doing in your reporting. You're gonna work real closely with our staff when compiling these reports. It's very important for us that we maintain accuracy and integrity when receiving and reporting the quarterly report data. If we can all adjust to this new format of reporting and all report the same way, then we can show the federal agencies just how amazing our subrecipients are in helping those who are in a vulnerable state. If you're unsure what type of proration works for your agency, or you're just super confused about this whole form, please contact our office and we'll gladly assist you. I'm going to give it back over to Julie on how to submit this report.
So you've done all that. So you're going to save the report with the name of your agency and the quarter in the title. So for example, it would be whatever your agency name is, VOCA Q1 for your first report. And then your agency name, VOCA Q2 for your second report. And then you're going to email that to the DCFS grants@dcfs.md.gov email. You can CC Jean and myself if you want, but that's not needed. If you send it to that main email, we'll get it. And remember to explain any significant changes in numbers from the previous report. And again, that's like 10% increases or decreases. Maybe you hired a new advocate, maybe you lost an advocate, maybe you had to close down for a few days because of an issue. Just explain anything that might be a big change that we wouldn't know why that happened. And you should receive an email confirmation receipt within 3 business days. If you don't, you can always reach out to us and make sure we got it. And we will reach out to you if it's missing. So the due dates. Here are the due dates. You can see the quarters that the months are, and then days are due, and they're always due on the 15th, except for the one in January because the 15th is Saturday. So that's due a day earlier, the 14th. So keep that in mind. And then I wanted to talk to you guys, new agencies, don't worry about this, but agencies that received funding last year or state fiscal year 21, if you got an award extension through the end of September 30th, you will not have to submit a separate report. You're going to count all your victims served and services funded with both the state fiscal year 21 and the state fiscal year 22 VOCA funding on the same quarterly report, the quarterly report form that we send you for the state fiscal year 22. So hopefully that makes things easier, that you don't have to separate it out by VOCA year funding, just VOCA client for that quarter. But the report will still be due on October 15th, and even if you don't spend any of your state fiscal year 22 awards, because you're still spending your fiscal year 21 awards, you still need to submit a report on the clients you saw and the victims you served. So remember that you're required to maintain backup documentation for all the questions you answer, and remember this can be an electronic system your agency has in place, or it can be intake forms, assessments, or whatever your agency uses to show and track that individuals are unique and only being counted once. And it's always good to remember to reference the GERS. The scores on quarterly reports is in GERS 22-26. It's very general though, because it covers all the GMU grants, so it doesn't go into the specifics, so it's not super helpful, but always good to think about the GERS has information. Do we have any questions that have come in? I haven't seen any, so I'm just going to keep going on the next section. Interrupt me, Jean, if you see a question.
I haven't seen any.
Okay, so OVC has supplemental questions. So you're going to receive a set of extra questions in an email that will need to be submitted with your October 15th report. They're going to cover the federal fiscal year, October 1st of 2020 through September 30th of 2021. If you're new, you'll just answer them for the July 1, 2021 through September 30th, 2021. Here are the questions so you know them ahead of time. I don't want them to be a surprise to any of you. These are written by OVC and collected by OVC, and the answers will not affect your funding. So don't feel like if you say you couldn't help a bunch of people because of capacity issues, that we're going to be like, no funding for you. No, it's just that the OVC, and we can see what agencies are facing and what trends are going on. So they're going to ask you the number of requests for services that were unmet because of organization or capacity issues, and then ask you to explain any of those. And does your organization formally survey clients for feedback on services received? If you answer no to that, you should think about adding a survey. Those are good. It's good to get input. And then it's going to ask you number of surveys distributed and the number of surveys completed. And then discuss some challenges your victim assistance program faced during the course of the federal fiscal year. I know that COVID has thrown us all for a loop, so I'm sure people will have some good answers on there. And please describe some of the services that victims needed but could not be provided, and what were the challenges that prevented those services from being provided. So I know I've heard a lot about housing issues. Lack of housing in Nevada is a big one. I don't know what else your agencies are facing. It's always good to hear what's needed. So please think about those answers and expect that email for those additional answers. I haven't seen any other questions come through, so I'm going to keep rolling just so that we can finish on time. I think we're almost at the end, though. We just have a few more questions. We want to thank you all for participating and being focused, and we're really thankful for your time, and we hope this is useful to you. So we have two more quick poll questions, and then the PowerPoint has our contact information, resources, acronyms, and then don't forget it also has the definitions of each of the types of victimizations. If you want to read that, that's helpful to make sure you're reporting those correctly. So here are the two. If you have questions, we'll go back to questions. So feel free to ask them as we answer these two poll questions. So I learned at least one new fact about the quarterly reporting during this training. Is that true or false? You guys learned at least one thing? That seems true.
Excellent. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yay. I'm glad you guys like that. Yay. Hey, it's nice to see that some of our longtime recipients have learned new facts today. So that's really awesome. So thank you guys.
Yeah, I know 2 hours of time is a big chunk, but we're glad to hear that at least people got something out of it. We thought we couldn't do a good job with a shorter training. So how would you rank today's training? From a big, sad, red, frowny face to a big, smiley face. And remember that, we just asked this so that we can improve. So if you have any feedback or ways that we could improve this training, things you would like to see added or removed or different things, we're open to suggestions. I'm glad we're seeing a lot of big smiley faces to medium smiley faces. That's good to hear. Yeah, Dean reminded everybody that all the polling questions are anonymous. So if you did a big frowny face, you wouldn't know who did that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen any other questions come through. So I personally want to thank everybody for the time.
Oh, yeah, it looks like everybody appreciated the training, so that's awesome. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of your guys' time and attention. I know this is a really long training, and it's a lot of information. We are providing it one more time this week, so if you feel like you want to join in on Friday, you're more than welcome to. It's a nice way to ease into your weekend and get all relaxed. So it looks like, Julie, you want to put up our contact information?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. There's a contact information for us.
Yeah, so there's our contact information. If you guys have any questions, you can always ask them to the general questions box, which is the DCFS grants at dcfs.nv.gov, or you can contact either Julie or myself directly, and we're happy to help you. We do have a new gal that just started. Her name is Adriana, and she is working on getting up and running, but will still be directing most questions to both Julie and myself, but you will be getting to know her this next year. So thank you guys so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And if there's no other questions, well, yay!
Sorry, I showbized you there.
You did. It's awesome.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.